Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Pedalshift. On this edition, we go all the way back to August 15th, 2019, for Pedalshift project number 174. You know, we all want to do the right thing, hopefully, and with any community, there's some unwritten codes of conduct for proper behavior. And I think in bicycle adventuring, that is certainly true. On this episode from back in 2019, we covered some of the rules for bicycle touring etiquette, but I think it applies anytime you are on a bike travel adventure. Hope you enjoy. On this episode, we're going to be talking about bicycle touring etiquette. And this came thanks to a listener recommendation. But as usual, I am a terrible podcast host. Why am I a terrible podcast host, you may ask? That is because I've managed to lose the email or social media message that gave me this great idea. So if you are the listener that came up with this great idea, I apologize for my lack of organizational capability. I managed to write down the idea, which is an excellent one, but I screwed up and didn't write down your name. So thank you for the great idea and apologies for being the worst podcast host in the world. I really think that this is an excellent topic because I think the vast majority of you listening to the show, especially bike tourists in general, are great citizens. I very rarely find myself looking at a situation going, that is a bad actor. That person is not being cool. It happens though. And I think that for some folks out there, especially if you're new to things, there's always that bit of hesitation and sort of like, hey, what's the etiquette? How do I behave? How do I act? And I thought that that was a really good question that the listener had. And I think it's something to chat about generally. Now, one big caveat here. I'm just a guy with a microphone and a podcast. This doesn't mean that I'm the arbiter of what is truly good behavior and bad behavior, but I think that the stuff I have here is pretty much common sense stuff. I'd be interested if anybody else has other things to add, or if for whatever reason you might disagree with any of the things that I have to say here about touring etiquette. So why don't we get into it? I've got it broken up into a few categories here, some of which you'll understand overlap a little bit, and I think you'll understand as we go along here. Let's start off with camping. Now, not everybody out there is going to be camping, but camping is the area where I think you get into one of the more etiquette type situations. What am I talking about? I mean, I'm saying that you're running into interactions with people in a way where there could be toes that are stepped on. There could be offense taken or whatever. Here's just some of the things that I would say. This is how I live my life when I'm on tour, and ways that I would recommend that you do as well. And kind of what I've observed are the broad-based norms for bicycle tourists in campgrounds, at least the ones that I've experienced. So here we go. Number one, watch your spacing. Now, in many campsites, they're going to be spaced out for you. There's going to be designated places where you put your tent. You don't really have to worry about this. I'm about to go on the C&O in a few days. There is it's kind of Wild West when it comes to how spacing goes. It's one great big campsite, and basically it's a free-for-all. Now, technically speaking, under the rules, only one group is supposed to be in any of these campsites at any given time, but in practice, that really never happens. I mean, it's a strange rule. I'm not even sure if it's still up. I should check to see if that's still up with the National Park Service, but that's actually was on the website a long time ago. When I say watch your spacing, I mean, don't kind of throw your tent right next to somebody who you don't know. Now, if you're traveling with a group, of course you can kind of, all be all clustered and be closer together. But otherwise, don't be on top of somebody at any given campsite. Now, granted, if it's going to be crowded and that's just how it works, that's fine. But communicate with folks ahead of time. I think that especially in the US, and this may be helpful for folks who come from other countries, there's a personal space issue that we have. And that is, we like to make sure that there's a little bit of space between folks. I think that there's tons of good studies on all of that. When you're at a shared campsite like that, as I mentioned, communicate. Say hello and ask if it's cool to camp there. Now, I'm not saying that it would be okay for someone to say no. This is just, again, this is etiquette, right? Nobody will ever say no to you in a shared campsite situation. Now, where would somebody say no to you? Let's say that you're at a regular old national park, say, and there are designated campsites and someone's at, spot number A22 and you walk up and you say, hey, can I camp on your site? They will say no to you. They should say no to you. That's usually not how it works. I'm talking about a situation where you're at a place where it's a kind of a large hiker biker area and, you're like, hey, I'm just going to, is it cool if hey, I see you. I'm going to go camp over here. Is that all cool? Cool. Hey, my name is Tim. Not always necessary to ask for permission so much. It's just sort of like acknowledging, saying, hey, I'm going to be over here. That usually is a good bit of etiquette. It's also a great opportunity to say hello to your neighbor. And I think saying hello to your neighbor is a really good opportunity to sort of assess your neighbor's desire to chat. And once you assess that, a lot of the times you're going to be saying hello to somebody and you're going to get the vibe off of them. They're like, look, I'm going to go right to sleep, or I'm not in the mood to chat, or maybe I had a bad day or something like that. And if that's the case, then etiquette demands that you kind of respect that. Sometimes you're going to end up with a chatty person and it may be reversed around on you, that there's somebody who's extra chatty and you don't necessarily want to chat so much. Find that balance there. But generally speaking, try to match what the vibe is with your neighbor and respect it. When you do get into conversations with folks, and I've run into this a bunch of times with folks that I feel like they don't realize it, but they're kind of humble bragging a little bit. What's a humble brag? It's just sort of saying, throwing out their exploits a little bit too much, saying, oh, well, actually, it's not even humble brag so much. A humble brag would be sort of like, well, yeah, I crossed country last year. It was real hard. I had a really difficult time crossing the country 4 times in the last 5 years. That's a humble brag. I think that it's fine to share your experiences, no doubt about it, but don't brag about it. And sometimes that's a real fine line. I remember this one guy, I think I've actually thrown this dude under the bus a few times. Speaking of poor etiquette on my point of view, way back on the show, past show, was like this one guy, all he did was just, every time there was a conversation, the dude always brought it back to the fact that he had done that, or he had biked across the country. Had he reminded us that he had biked across the country that prior year? It was a little much, and it was total bad luck. Don't be that dude. It just comes across poorly, and I don't know. It just doesn't work real well. On the flip side, if people are asking for your advice or your information, because if it comes out, it's like, have you biked this trail before? Yeah, I've done this a bunch of times. I've been biking it since 2011. Oh, okay, cool. They'll then, if they ask a bunch of questions, feel free to answer. But there's a fine line between saying, yeah, I biked this a bunch, and saying, let me tell you how much of an expert I am on this trail. See what I did there? It's a real big difference. And I think that different people are going to have different points of view as to where that line is. And you know what? Just do you, be good about it, but be mindful of how you're coming across. Because sometimes there can be some situations where you don't come across real good. And again, this is all etiquette. There's a lot of gray space in here. One other thing that I would say, while being open about giving information out, especially if people ask, don't force opinions and suggestions on people. And I feel like that's kind of a major theme of this show. I talk a lot about riding your ride. I think that we all come with opinions. We come with opinions on many different things. But I think that, there's not just one way to tour a route or a trail or a gravel road, and you don't need to do it with any particular type of equipment or a particular type of bike. Sometimes there's going to be times where there are things that make it easier than others, and that might be the kind of conversation that you can have. But saying, it's like, you've got to ride this thing with tires that are this width, and you're crazy that you're riding that bike, and I can't believe you didn't come out here with waterproof panniers, and oh my God, you don't have fenders. What a disaster. You see what I'm doing? That's the kind of stuff where it's like, look, no. Share stuff if you have extra. I was on the Oregon coast in June, and I talked about this on the tour journal. I had a 6-pack, which I had no intention of drinking all of. Trust me, I was going to bring home the extras. I am not an over-imbiber. In fact, I think I have that somewhere in one of these up here, coming up later on in this dialogue, this diatribe here. But there were some other folks in camp, and you know what? I brought over the rest of the 6-pack and I shared it because I had extra. Now, does that mean you have to do it? No, absolutely not. Is it expected of you? No, but you know what? It's kind of cool. It's kind of a good thing to do. So share stuff if you got extra, if you're willing. It's a good look, especially if you want to make conversation, you want to share things with people. If someone is needing a spare tube and you've got an extra spare tube, and that will be the difference between them getting on the road tomorrow, share it. It's good karma for you. Trust me. Couple more things here in the camping area. You'll notice a lot of these things don't necessarily neatly fit just in camping, but this is in the camping area. Respect quiet hours. I'll tell you what, this is one thing that normally, if you're in a biking campground, you don't have to worry about too much, because for the most part, people have biked long distances and they're ready to go to bed relatively early. So it's usually not an issue. But if you're taking a 0 day and maybe you're a bit of a night owl, make sure that if you're having a conversation, a late night conversation by the fire or something like that, know that there's going to be people nearby who are going to be going to bed right around sundown. And sometimes that's going to be very early. So just respect those quiet hours. What are they? Usually by about 9 o'clock, if you can still hear loud conversations, that's starting to go over the line. If you go to commercial campgrounds, they usually say 9 or 10 o'clock p.m. is usually the quiet hour beginning. So draw lines similarly. There may be posted quiet hours. Respect them if those are there. It's just cool for your fellow campers to do that. The flip side of that is respect late sleepers as you take off. I tend to be an early to bed, early to rise person on bike tour, and only on bike tour. I am not that in real life. It's kind of funny. I don't know why that's the case. But when I get up in the morning, I am quiet. I make sure that I'm not playing anything on my phone. If I do, it's on headphones. And, I try to reduce the amount of clinking and Velcro tearing and all of that, just because I know just because I'm getting up at the crack of freaking dawn doesn't mean that everybody else wants to. I know that I've been lying in a tent before trying to sleep in or wanting to sleep in and getting woken up by people who are like guffawing and laughing, making pancakes at 6 a.m. Look, real happy you're making the cakes there, but please keep it down. It's 6 a.m., yo. I don't know what time would be a reasonable hour to kind of say, okay, if you're not up by now, it's on you. But, a few hours after sunrise in most instances. It just sort of all depends. Anyways, that's my etiquette for camping while on bike tour. Here is a sort of non-negotiable thing about camping, and it's got its own category, and it is leave no trace. Those of you who have been with the show for a while know that I went on a diatribe, years ago, when there was news out of the Oregon Outback route where people were just like littering and everything like that. And I had an actual honest to goodness rant. The Flaming Sword of Justice came out and I did a whole thing. And this has to do with the concepts of leave no trace. I think this is a non-negotiable thing. You know how I normally am, sort of like, ride your ride, you do you. There's not one way. I think in terms of camping, if you're not practicing leave no trace, you're doing it wrong. And it's one of the few things where I actually say that's the case. So anyways, leave no trace. If you don't know what that is, Google it, because then you can get a better definition. I won't define it specifically here, but let me give you a few ideas here. I think most people probably know what it means. So go Google it if you don't know what leave no trace principles are. First thing that I want to say about that is think ahead of time. If you can reduce the amount of packaging and garbage that you've got on you before you roll, that's going to make a big difference as you are producing said garbage. One of the first things that I do when I'm on tour and I stop at a grocery store especially is I shed all of the extra packaging and I utilize the garbage facilities that are there and I get rid of them. Frankly, I try to shop for things that have as little garbage as possible if I can do it. If I can buy in bulk, I'm doing that. But, for instance, let's come up with something in Pop-Tarts. I just bought Pop-Tarts today. I am eating so poorly for this ride, but I find that, for for a good boost of energy, and because I do eat sugar while I ride and when I'm on tour and I'm doing 60, 70 miles a day, Pop-Tarts, they're great. I will recycle the cardboard box that comes with it before I roll. I'm not going to keep them in the cardboard box because all it is, and when I'm done mowing down those Pop-Tarts, I'm left with a box and all those wrappers. Well, the wrappers are much easier to kind of cart on out. The box, it takes up more space. Yeah, I guess I could fold it down and put it in the bottom of the pannier, but I don't need it. So extra things that you don't need for packaging, recycle, toss, whatever you need to do ahead of time. And then it's less to carry. It's less to worry about losing off of your bike. I don't know about you, but I've had situations before where I've seen empty trash bags on a trail before. And at first I'm thinking, what a bunch of lazy folks, they just leave their trash. But then I think about it a little bit. What's probably happened is their garbage bag fell off their bike. So if you have less garbage, well, there's less of a chance that there's going to be a lot of garbage out there. So think about that. Sidebar. Hey, always have a garbage bag with you, no matter what it is. Typically speaking, when I go to a grocery store, I'll use one of the plastic bags that I get, and I'll use that as a garbage bag. I'll use another one as a seat cover if I don't have my seat cover with me. There's a whole bunch of uses for these plastic bags, but definitely as a garbage bag. Always have one on you. Always have an extra one on you because you just never know. You're going to be producing some garbage as you go along. You might even be able to pick up some if you can. Be a good citizen and pick up garbage if you see it and you've got the opportunity to do it because you know what? You're on wheels and you can get out of there. It's a lot easier for us on bikes to do it than hikers if it's a shared trail like the C&O, like I'm going to be on. You can tell a lot of this is filtered through the experience of the C&O and what I'll be doing next week. If there are no bathroom facilities where you are going to be. So now I'm talking to a lot of you gravel folks, you backcountry folks, or if frankly the need hits and you gotta go. Learn some backcountry techniques about what to do with your waste. Digging a cat hole, things along those lines. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you're going to be going on a route where you think that this is going to be an issue, you're going to want to research this because you could get a backpacker trowels, things like that, so that you can properly dispose of your waste and, know that you're going to have to bring toilet paper with you. Sorry, we're getting on the gross side here. I'm reading a book right now that is talking about pandemics. And one of the great pandemics that we have had over the centuries includes many bouts of cholera. Cholera is something that can come from human and animal waste. And it is bad, bad news. And it is redoubling my efforts to make sure that anytime that I'm going to be out in the backcountry, that I am properly disposing of my waste. It is just deadly what can happen out there. And, it's also why we're always carrying filters and why we're not just drinking out of ponds and out of streams. Because, man, you get some of that stuff, it is uncomfortable at the best case scenario and could be deadly at worst. And that's the kind of stuff that just spreads like crazy. So make sure that you are doing your best. And when I say your best, you are absolutely succeeding in disposing of your waste properly. Respect water bodies. Don't dig these cat holes anywhere near a stream. Learn all the rules. Learn the things that you need to do. This is an absolute must for Leave No Trace and for backcountry activity. Learn before you go if you don't know. All right, now that we have had the poo talk, let's move on to other areas of etiquette. And this one I think is certainly more broadly applicable, and that is speed and passing. This is something that might even be helpful for you when you're not on tour and you're on a shared use trail, you're on the road and you're going to be running into other bicyclists, other runners maybe, other folks on freaking motorized scooters. We're getting a lot of those in DC. We've had them for a couple of years. So here's how you deal with it. Some trails, if you're on a trail, have a speed limit. Some states have a top speed limit for bicycles and bike lanes. Some municipalities have the same thing. Whatever. If there is a speed limit, respect that speed limit, particularly in more crowded areas. But Tim, some will say, listening, what if I'm doing one of those cool rides where I'm doing the entire C&O in one shot? And I'm going overnight and the speed limit is an unreasonable 15 miles per hour and I'm going to be doing 16, 17 in spots. Okay. I think that the speed limit is largely broadly applicable. I think that speed limits, like in vehicles, for better or for worse, often are exceeded a little bit when conditions are okay. I think that that's probably reasonable. Where it's not okay is when you're bicycling around a whole bunch of people. How many times have you, as a cyclist, been out there and there's been somebody on what seems like a speed trial going through crowds? That's not cool. That's definitely not cool. There are better places to do a straight line speed trial than on a crowded Sunday on a trail. Don't do that. Don't be that person. Don't be that person on tour or on panniers. Respect the speed limits within reason. Be reasonable about it, especially in crowded areas. Many trails, and again, I'm back on trails here, but a lot of states will have these rules. A lot of municipalities will have these rules just for being out. New York City, if I'm not mistaken, actually requires you to have a bell on your bike. A lot of trails require you to have a bell on your bike for passing. If you don't, if there's no requirement for that, great, but know before you go, because that's something that you want to respect. Again, this is an etiquette thing, but it's also a legal thing in some instances. Now, is this going to be a highly enforced law? Probably not, but I'll tell you what, in New York City, I know I've seen recently on Twitter, some folks were being pulled over for not having bells on their bike. I don't know if that's a thing, but that seemed to be what it was going. Regardless, make sure that when you are passing somebody, especially if it's a pedestrian, especially if it's a runner or whatever, make sure you use the bell if you got it. I finally broke down and got a bell. I thought they were rude, frankly. But then over time, as I've been passed on a lot of instances, a lot of people who do the call on your left do it in kind of a rude ass way. So now I'm starting to get to the point where it's like, you know what? I think the bells, if you ring them in the right way, at the right distance, loudly and with alacrity, that is a great friendly way of letting people know where you're at. And you know what? Most people are going to be cool with it. If you call on your left because you don't have a bell, or you're, for whatever reason, I will sometimes call on your left as opposed to using my bell. Please do it in a friendly way. I cannot tell you how off-putting it is when I get a grumpy on your left anyplace. It's really off-putting. It's sort of like, oh, I'm sorry I'm in your way or whatever. You know, it's just like, it's funny. Now, that person's probably having a bad day. That's cool. But you know what? Try to be friendly and cool out there. I think I've got a whole category coming up called Be Cool as part of the etiquette lesson here. It certainly applies right here. Be friendly. When you're doing the call on your left or you're ringing that bell, do it every time. Even if, and you know what I'm about to talk about here, if you're really frustrated that the runners you're passing by on this shared use trail are wearing headphones and never hear you. I mean, that happens all time period here locally in DC, whether it's folks who are walking or running or whatever. It happens all the time. But you know what? I still try as best I can to ring or call out, because you know what? You got to do everything you can to let them know that you're passing, and at least you're doing your due diligence here. If someone's going to be negligent, don't let it be you. That's kind of my rule. And yeah, it's kind of a bummer if people are listening to headphones too loud, but you know what? You be the good citizen here. Practice the good etiquette every time. Call on your left. Make sure you ring that bell. Does it mean that you're always going to be heard? No. But you know what? I think it's important that you do it no matter what. I try to do it. I don't always succeed. I'll be perfectly honest here. I'm not like a super Boy Scout here with any of this kind of stuff, but I try. And that's why I'm talking about this. Look, it's so easy to get frustrated. Remember, when you're on a shared trail, or even if you're in a bike lane or something like that, you're sharing. It's not your trail. It's not your bike lane. It's not your road. You're sharing it with other pedestrians, other runners, other bicyclists, sometimes other cars. You know, keep that in mind that, you know, we're all kind of using it. And, you know, hopefully the shared use is equally respectful. You're not going to be running into folks who are going to be running four abreast, taking up the whole trail, although that happens sometimes too. But you know what? We're all sharing, and, you know, try to keep that as your goal in mind, that it's not just you who are out there. Other people are going to be using it. And sometimes, you know, there's going to be points where there's going to be crossing over, and that crossover means that someone's going to be a little inconvenienced for a moment. And sometimes it's going to be you. And you know what? That's how it is. That is how it is. Hopefully folks are going to be practicing similar etiquette, but sometimes they won't. Don't blow your top. It's cool. You're out for a bike ride, man. There's nothing wrong with that. Last but not least, when you run into this situation that I kind of just described, I sometimes I don't do really good in this area. Sometimes I will get a little barky. Sometimes I will be like, "Hey, trying to get around you here," or maybe not quite as nice as that. I would say do better than me. Avoid lecturing other trail users, especially if you're a visitor to the area. The one place where I am on my best behavior, I've noticed, is when I'm traveling and I'm on other trails. Man, when I did the OTET, I was the most chill, friendly person ever. I didn't run. There were other people. I slowed way down. I braked. I inconvenienced myself all the time in the face of lack of etiquette on other trail users' part. And I had a smile on my face and it was all good. Why? I think because I was a visitor. I'm on trails that I frequent more frequently. Well, maybe I'm not so good. I think I'd like to be more like the visiting person, but I would say you want to especially be like that when you're a visitor, because you know what? You're a visitor. Be a good guest of any kind of trail, road, place that you're at. Are there times when you need to get a little confrontational? Sure. If it's a safety issue and stuff like that, yes, absolutely. But for the most part, if you're just being inconvenienced because you got to slow way down or something like that, you know what? You're on bike tour or you're on a ride, and you know what? That's reward enough. And yeah, it kind of stinks, and I hate taking one for the team, but you know what? It's way better. It's better for your blood pressure. It's better for your life. It's better for everything. So avoid lecturing other folks, unless, of course, it's a safety issue. And even then, be cool about it. Speaking of that, we're up to the be cool section, which is our final section of bicycle touring etiquette. This is broad stuff. And some of this, I feel like shouldn't be said, doesn't need to be said, but I'm going to say it anyways, just because it's part of the episode. Respect boundaries with people you meet and other bike tourists. This could be in camp. This could be at the side of the road. Look, not everyone is going to be thrilled to be chatting with you. Not everyone is going to be interested in going down any conversational roads or will want to camp with you or want to ride with you or whatever. That's cool. When you get the vibe off of somebody that they're done chatting with you, move on. That's the way that you probably want to go. Frankly, if someone's not interested in chatting with you, why do you want to hang out with them anyways? Know what I mean? So respect boundaries. Know when to say when, basically, with all of your interactions. I think that this is a very subtle thing, and it's tough, especially with somebody new that you're meeting, and you never know kind of where those boundaries are going to be. But you know what? Tread lightly, be cool. Again, be cool. That's the overarching theme to all of this. And you know what? Better to kind of back off and ghost out rather than overstay your welcome. Know what I'm saying? Okay. This I talked about earlier, and this is watch your consumption of everything, whether that is alcohol or if you are imbibing some other stuff too. Hey, no judgment here, but I will say that you want to watch your consumption because bad things can happen if you overindulge, and you can cross boundaries, you can cross lines. And in many places, you may be not complying with the campsite rules. A lot of campsites say, hey, no alcohol at all. And certainly probably no weed or something like that. And there's a lot of states where it's legal. So you can go for it if you're in the States or if you're in other countries where it is. Again, no judgment. Not that I think weed is going to cause you to cross any lines here, but you see what I'm saying. I think that you want to make sure that you are not doing anything that's going to cause you to behave in a way that crosses any lines. Sometimes overindulging will do that. So watch your consumption when you're out there. I ran into, again, kind of famously back, what tour was this? I'm going to have to think about this a second. Oh, no, this was the 14 tour. This was in California, and there was one guy who was kind of parallel riding with us. This was when I met the guys, the League of Nations guys. You can go back and listen to past episodes and talk about that group. One guy that was not a part of that was a dude who we ended up having met at. We were out for dinner and crossed paths with him, and he He had had way too much to drink, and he was not behaving well with the server, and it was not cool, and I did not enjoy it, and I did not want to be around him. And basically I biked 70 miles the next day to make sure that I would never have to see him again. Haven't. Hi, if you're listening. Hi. Yeah, watch your consumption. It's not cool to overindulge and do things that you wouldn't do when you're sober. But sad thing is, I'm not sure if that dude wouldn't have done it sober either, but that's sidebar. Be cool. Be cool. That's all I have to say. Last but not least, you're an ambassador. I have said this before on the show. I think that this is another kind of sub-theme of the show. When we are out there riding, we are ambassadors for bike touring generally. That's why I was so ticked off those years ago when there were people on bikes on the Oregon Outback littering, and they really screwed things up in at least one particular town for bicycle touring and outback riding generally, because they were jerks and they ruined people's private property, and they littered, and they did all the types of things that you're not supposed to do. When you roll through a town and you're a bad actor, that's going to color the opinions of folks who live in that town towards folks on bikes. So what you're doing is you're making my ride harder the next time, the next person's ride harder the next time. You see what I'm saying? So be mindful that every action that you have, every interaction that you have is going to have some kind of a line, some kind of an impact down the road. Does that mean that you have to, just take what you get from everybody? And like, if somebody's being a jerk to you in that town, then you can't respond? No. What I'm saying is that be a good actor, be cool. You're an ambassador. You don't want to have other good citizens out there feel negatively towards other bike tourists, because you know what? You represent all of us, and we're only as good as the worst among us. Sometimes that's not a good feeling sometimes. But what I would say is, if we can all sort of lift our game up and be cool, then you know what? It's going to be better for all of us. Here's the good news. After all of this talk, I've given some stories of some of the worst behavior that I've seen. I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. Most people who do this, most people who ride and travel by bike are super cool people, and who do follow the rules within reason and are good with other people and aren't jerks and aren't drinking a bottle of wine and hitting on waitresses and being awful. You know what? Most people are super cool, and that is one of the great reasons why I can continue to kind of thrive in this community, because I feed off of goodness amongst people out there, because you know what? It just makes you feel good that you're part of a community that in a large part is doing good things and behaving really well. And you know what? We're doing something that we all love, and this feeds off of each other and all the good vibes and everything. And I've lost my train of thought, and you know how it goes. So in any event, let me go back here and do a little bit of a roundup here on etiquette. Remember, when you're in camping, make sure you're watching your spacing, talk to your neighbors, communicate, don't brag about your exploits, be open with your information, but don't be braggy about it. Don't force your opinions and suggestions on other people. Share stuff if you have extra and you'll want to. Respect quiet hours on both the front end and the back end of your trip. Leave no trace. That's a non-negotiable. When it comes to riding, follow the speed limits within reason. Make sure you're letting people know when you're passing with a bell or an on your left. Try not to get frustrated. Know you're sharing a trail or a road or whatever with other users, and know that that is something that is going to sometimes inconvenience you. And that's cool, because you know what? We're sharing these resources, and we're riding bikes, and that is awesome, and that should be a reward of itself. Last but not least, be cool, respect boundaries, watch your consumption. You are an ambassador. Yes, you, gentle listener, are an ambassador, and that's why we want to practice all good etiquette when we are out there bike touring. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.